Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're not a warrior or a courtier or even some plague-ridden peasant grovelling for bread. You're something worse, something useful. You're an executioner. The man the law keeps at arm's length and the crowd wants just close enough to watch. You wear no robes, earn no titles, and speak to God through splinters and iron. You don't sign the death warrants, you just carry them out. And when the crowd goes home, when the priests retreat to their candles and the magistrates toast their virtue, you're left alone with the stain that won't wash out. The blood's not yours, but it never quite leaves your hands either. Before we begin, do me one small favour. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love hearing where everyone is tuning in from. And if you'd like early access to more of these melancholy little tales, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable, let's begin. You weren't born to kill, but you weren't born to starve either. And in your corner of the world, that's more or less the same thing. Your family had a trade once, something honest. Your father was a tanner. He taught you the skills that kept meat on the table and coin in the jar, skinning, cutting, scraping, cleaning. But the town never looked at him without holding its breath. And when he died, they looked at you. Not with kindness, with calculation. There was a vacancy, and they had a young man who already knew how to hold a knife. No one ever says the word out loud. Not at first, they don't need to. You notice it in the way your neighbours pause before greeting you, or how the baker shortens your loaf when he thinks you aren't watching. The priest, once friendly enough, starts forgetting your name during sermons. Your friends thin out. One by one, they stop visiting. You begin to feel like a stain no one wants to scrub directly, so they just move the furniture around you. Even the dogs seem more cautious. It doesn't take long to understand. They know what's coming, and they've already decided it's your role, whether you accept it or not. It begins with a favour. Always a favour. The magistrate finds you outside the tannery, arms slick with lye, and asks if you'd be willing to assist with a burial. Not a proper one. A thief, unnamed, dumped by the roadside, after swinging from a branch for a few days too many. No priest will touch him. No family came forward. But the flies are thick now, and the children are starting to gawk. They need someone strong-stomached. You do it because saying no isn't a luxury you've had in a while. They give you a coin, then another, then a name. The second favour is worse. This time the body's still warm. A heretic, they say, though you couldn't tell by looking. He's tied to a post behind the jail, blood dried into his shirt, eyes open and cloudy. The last man who worked the axe retired, or drank himself into permanent shaking, and the new one hasn't arrived yet. But the crowd's already gathered. Someone has to finish the job. It's not supposed to be your place, but your place doesn't seem to matter anymore. You take the axe, it's heavier than you thought. Your hands aren't steady, and when it's done, when the head tumbles like a dropped turnip and the crowd gasps, you feel something you can't quite name. Not guilt, not pride, just a kind of silence inside your chest where something used to be. You think briefly that this might be the end of it. A one-time thing. A mistake of circumstance. You go home, scrub your hands raw, and wait for the shame to wash off. It doesn't. But something else arrives instead. A note, folded into thirds, sealed with wax, from the town clerk. It's not a thank you, it's a job offer, or more accurately, a job confirmation. They've voted, quietly, behind closed doors. The position is yours. You won't be paid much, but you'll be housed. You'll receive a small allowance for tools, and an additional sum for each service rendered. The phrase they use is, in the interest of civic continuity. You stare at the words for a long time. You imagine tearing the paper in half. But you don't. You try saying no. You go to the clerk's office with your best tunic on and your head held level. You explain politely that you aren't qualified, that someone else, someone trained would be better suited. He doesn't disagree. but he folds his hands over his stomach and tells you something strange. That people don't want a stranger holding the axe. They want someone local, familiar, someone they already feel distant from. They'd rather be repulsed by someone they recognize than trust someone new. You nod slowly. You feel something crack a little in the back of your throat. It's not grief, just understanding. Your name is posted outside the church 2 days later. Official executor of sentences and civic punishments. The ink smudges in the rain. A boy laughs as he points it out to his friend. You say nothing. You return home and find a small satchel left by your door. Inside are gloves, a whetstone, and a flask of something sharp enough to burn the roof of your mouth. There's also a key, rusted, stiff in the lock of a shack near the edge of town that now belongs to you. No neighbours, no candles in the windows nearby, just crows, a latrine with a broken door, and a chopping block that hasn't been cleaned in months. You sit on the bed that night and stare at your hands. They look the same. They always do. But something about them feels different now. Heavier, maybe, or older. You flex your fingers and imagine what they'll have to learn. Where to aim. How much pressure. How not to tremble when the crowd leans forward. It occurs to you for the first time that this isn't just a job. It's a sentence. Not on them. On you. The next morning, the clerk hands you a name, a purse of coins, and the weight of permanent estrangement. You tuck it all into your coat. You don't ask who the man was or what he did. You'll find out soon enough. You always do. No one trains you, not really. There are no lessons, no manuals, no helpful diagrams passed down from one professional to the next. If there ever was a guild for your sort, it died out with the last man who cared enough to organise it. The town gave you the title, but not the technique. They assume you'll figure it out, or at least that you won't botch it in front of a noble. That's the unspoken rule. Peasants can die ugly. Nobles can't. The first few weeks pass in a fog of anxious improvisation. You spend your mornings oiling tools you barely know how to use and your nights staring at your own reflection in a rusted blade, hoping for some sign of certainty. It never comes. Instead, you get a quiet knock on your door, and a pig, not alive, not whole, just the upper half, dragged in a sack and dumped on your doorstep by a red-faced guard who says, "Practice," without meeting your eyes. You ask what you're supposed to do with it. He shrugs and leaves. The sack leaks as you drag it back inside. You spend the next few days swinging. At first, it's just to build the rhythm. You think that matters. You raise the axe, feel the weight in your shoulders, and bring it down hard into the meat. It's messier than you expected, less theatrical. The spine doesn't always give. Sometimes you hit it clean, and the head lolls back in a way that suggests you're getting the hang of it. Other times, the blade jams, and you have to work it loose while the blood pools beneath your boots. The pig says nothing. That's the only comfort. After 3 pigs and 1 goat, someone decides you're ready for a corpse. Not a fresh one. This man's been dead for 2 days, left in the jail after a fever took him before the noose could. They didn't want to waste a good rope on a body, so now he's yours. They strip him down and tie him to a post in a field behind the chapel, far enough from town that no one will complain about the stench. You stand there for an hour before moving. You don't know if it's respect or hesitation. Maybe both. You're not used to looking a man in the face before you cut him. He's slack-jawed, grey at the edges, and covered in old bruises. You nod, as if to say sorry, and swing. The first strike misses the neck entirely. It glances off his shoulder and sinks into the post. The second strike lands, but shallow. It takes 3 more before the head finally falls. You don't feel triumph. You feel sick. You sit down beside what's left and try not to vomit. The guard who brought you watches in silence, then walks away without a word. Later, he tells the clerk he'll do. You try different blades, some curved, some flat. One with a notch halfway down the edge that catches oddly in flesh. You sharpen, resharpen, test the weight by feel. There's no one to ask. The last man who held the job drank himself blind, and his tools were either stolen or rusted through. You find an old diagram in a monastery archive, some scribbled page in Latin showing where to strike on the spine. It's vague, probably drawn by someone who never held an axe. Still, you memorize it, not because it's helpful, because it's all you have. Sometimes the guards bring you condemned men early. They tell you it's for efficiency, but really, it's so they don't have to deal with the body afterward. You try to make the end quick, clean. You brace the neck against the block and ask if they have any last words. Most spit. Some pray. One, a boy barely older than you, looks up and says, "Make it look good." You try, you miss. The second blow takes it. You bury him yourself. Hands shaking the whole time. Other towns have training, you hear. Some even send their executioners abroad to France or Italy to learn from professionals. Not yours. Yours has a budget, and the budget has priorities. They're content with the occasional pig and a prayer. You learn mostly by failure, not the kind you can apologize for, the kind that bleeds. You build a dummy out of straw and old linen. You give it a neck made of bundled reeds and mark the spots with red chalk. You spend hours swinging into it until your arms go numb. You speak to it sometimes, practice your lines. In the name of the law, you say, or may God have mercy. It feels ridiculous, but better to feel foolish in the shack than in front of a jeering crowd. You rehearse your grip. One hand low, one hand steady. You work on the pace of your steps, the way you stand, the angle of the drop. You begin to treat it like a trade. It's the only way to survive. One morning the clerk visits. He tells you there's to be a public execution. You're first. A thief who murdered a merchant's son. Popular case. The crowd will be large. You ask for more time. He shakes his head. The noose is ready. The platform has already been built. Just make sure the head comes off in one, he says. They'll forgive anything but mess. Then he leaves. You sleep poorly the night before. Your hands twitch in your dreams. And when you wake, your knuckles ache. You clean your axe 3 times. You dress in your best coat, such as it is, and walk to the square with your hood low. The crowd is already forming, mothers with children, vendors with roasted nuts, old men with wine on their breath. They call out names, wagers, curses. You stand behind the block and wait. The condemned man is young, sharp-eyed, defiant. He spits on the ground and shouts something about justice. The crowd laughs. You say nothing. You guide him to the block. He resists a little, but you've learned to press down at the base of the neck, not the top. You raise the axe. It's heavier than usual. Your palms sweat. For a second, you think you'll miss. You don't. The head rolls clean, mouth open. The crowd gasps, then cheers. A woman faints. A man claps. You don't look at them. You don't look at the head. You step back, wipe the blade, and walk off before anyone can catch your eye. Later they'll say, it was a fine performance. Professional. Efficient. They'll forget your name by nightfall. Your first public job goes better than expected, if only because the man didn't scream. After that first execution, the names keep coming. Quietly, predictably. The work settles into your bones the way cold does. Gradual, numbing, and impossible to shake. The crowds keep watching. The magistrates keep nodding. And you keep showing up. Over time, you begin to understand what no one ever says aloud, that the killing is only half your duty. The other half is choosing how. Because not every death is the same. Not every neck deserves the axe. Some are meant for the noose, others for the sword, the fire, the wheel. The punishment isn't just about pain. It's about message, theatre, symbol. You're not just a tradesman now. You're a curator of methods. And each tool has its own language. An executioner without tools is just another man people hate. The title means nothing without the instruments. You're not a priest with robes and rings and incense. You don't hold a badge or a scroll. What you have is iron and fire and rope, and the understanding that they all need to be used just right. Your work is judged in fractions of seconds and inches of bone. And the difference between a clean job and a public disgrace is often no more than the way your wrist turns on the second swing. The axe is your constant. It's the first thing people picture when they hear your name. The image that makes children flinch and drunkards grow bold. You have more than one, of course, at least 3 in working order, and a 4th that's more ceremonial than functional. The good one is heavy-bladed, slightly curved, with a wooden shaft that smells faintly of mould, no matter how often you clean it. It doesn't need to gleam. It just needs to bite deep and true. You keep it oiled, honed, wrapped in cloth when not in use. You sharpen it by hand with a whetstone worn smooth from repetition, and you test the edge against a strip of leather until it slides clean. A dull axe is louder, slower, crueler. You try not to let that happen, though some days it's not up to you. The sword, when it comes out, means someone important is dying. Nobles don't die like the rest. They need a blade with dignity. Clean lines, grace. You were given one by the mayor himself, a narrow executioner's sword with no point, forged only to cut necks, not stab chests. You don't use it often, but when you do, everything changes. You dress better. You speak more softly. You're told to hold the hilt just so, to bow slightly before the strike, to offer a final word on behalf of the crown or the church. The sword doesn't cut deeper than the axe, but it performs better. The blood sprays just the same. But for them, it's an act. You're part of the scenery. The silk curtain on the final scene of a very expensive play. Then there's the rope. Common, cheap, efficient. It's the method of choice when no one cares how the body looks afterward. You've hung thieves, poachers, debtors, heretics and adulterers. Some deserved it, some didn't. The noose doesn't discriminate. You've learned to knot it yourself. Tight but not too tight, low but not too low. A drop that's too short strangles. Too long, and the head might come off entirely. That's happened once. You still dream about it. The crowd didn't mind though. They cheered. They always do when something goes wrong. You started measuring more carefully after that. You started sleeping less. The garrote is for special occasions, quiet, unpleasant, almost clinical. It's used in narrow rooms out of public view, usually for spies or traitors, sometimes for madmen the courts can't bring themselves to burn. You've only used it twice. It's a metal collar with a screw at the back, turned slowly until the throat caves in. It takes longer than anyone wants to admit. The second time, the man cried the whole way through. You told yourself you'd never use it again, but it hangs on the wall of your shack, just in case the law says otherwise. The wheel is older than most of the buildings in your village. It doesn't get used much anymore, partly because it's expensive, partly because people have lost their appetite for drawn-out endings. But now and then someone powerful wants to make a statement, and you're called to dust it off. It's a cartwheel mounted on a tall frame. The condemned is tied down, limbs splayed out like a starfish, and the executioner, meaning you, breaks their bones with a hammer before weaving them through the spokes. It's not fast, it's not clean, it's never necessary, but it sends a message, and afterward they often leave the body there for days like a warning nailed to the air. Then there's fire, the oldest tool of all, reserved for heretics, witches, and anyone the church wants to make an example of. You don't light the flames yourself, not usually. That part falls to the priests, or the guards, or the trembling altar boys with smoke in their eyes. But you're the one who binds the wrists, who checks the stakes, who arranges the kindling so the fire doesn't go out halfway through. You've learned to soak the wood so it smoulders slower. They say it gives the condemned more time to repent. But you know the truth. It gives the crowd more time to watch. Every tool has its meaning. The axe is punishment. The sword is ceremony. The rope is routine. The wheel is fear. The fire is faith. You're the one who knows how to use them. Not just mechanically, but symbolically. You're not just killing a person. You're enforcing a lesson. You're sculpting memory into spectacle. You're a technician, yes, but also a curator, a stagehand, a prop master for a moral theatre, No one wants to acknowledge they paid to attend. You start keeping meticulous notes, measurements, wood types, blade angles. You chart out drop heights and wound depths, not because anyone asks you to, but because it gives you a sense of control. You record how long it takes different kinds of rope to fray, how long it takes a head to roll, depending on how tense the neck muscles are at the time of death. You become a quiet kind of scholar, not of law, of limits. No one wants to hear about any of this, of course. When you sit near the hearth in a tavern and someone asks what you do, you lie. You say you work with timber, or iron, or waste. They nod and scoot a little farther down the bench. You drink alone. You sharpen blades alone. You walk through the market with your hood up and your eyes low. Everyone pretends you don't exist until they need you. Then they know your name again, but never for long. Once a magistrate's clerk asked if you'd consider travelling. To other towns, other provinces. They were short on skilled hands, and your record was clean. You said no, not because of loyalty, but because you know the tools don't change. The work doesn't change. The loneliness doesn't care about geography. You'd still be the man who knows exactly how much pressure it takes to sever a neck from behind. You'd still be greeted with silence. The worst part is how easily the tools begin to feel like extensions of yourself. You feel naked without your whetstone, unsettled without the weight of the axe. You find yourself running your fingers over the rope at night, checking for frays even when you're not scheduled to hang anyone. When the garrote creaks on its hook, you check it without thinking. Your hands know what to do before your mind catches up. Some nights you dream in shapes. The curve of the blade, the straight edge of the sword, the wide yawning circle of the wheel. You wake up reaching for tools that aren't there. You reach for silence, for ritual, for a job that only ends when your own name is posted outside the chapel with the hour of your death beneath it. And even then, someone else will swing the axe. The axe is sharp, the block is wet, the noose is waiting. You live in a house no one will visit. Not because it's haunted, though some children whisper that it is, but because it might as well be. It sits alone at the edge of the village, too far from the chapel bells to hear them clearly, too near the burial field to forget where you are. The thatch is patchy. The hearth smokes when it rains. There's moss in the corners and a draught that sneaks in through the floorboards, no matter how many blankets you stack. But it's yours. Or at least, the town doesn't ask for rent. The home came with the job. Not a gift exactly, more like a compromise. A place to sleep that doesn't offend anyone's conscience. You didn't choose it, but you've made it yours in small, unremarkable ways. You keep the kettle clean. You've patched the roof 3 times. There's a hook by the door for your coat and a chest at the foot of the bed where you keep your tools wrapped in cloth and silence. You even planted something once, onion bulbs behind the shack, but they didn't take. The soil here's no good. Too shallow, too sour. Your bed is a slab of straw with a wool blanket so thin the wind laughs through it. The pillow is filled with sawdust and old regrets. You wake up stiff every morning, and sometimes you hear your bones protest when you stand. There's a table with 3 legs that leans like it's had too much to drink, and a chair that squeaks louder than most men do when the blade's halfway through. You eat at that table, alone, with a tin spoon and a wooden bowl. Most days it's barley or turnip stew, thickened with yesterday's bread. Sometimes, if a guard is feeling generous, you get salted pork. Once there was a chicken. You still remember that day like it was a holiday. The well is 20 paces from your door, but it feels farther in winter. The path gets slick, and your boots have holes you've patched too many times to count. You draw your own water, chop your own wood, cook your own food, speak your own name aloud sometimes, just to remember what it sounds like. The villagers don't come near. Not for repairs, not for charity, not even for gossip. You're not part of the social order anymore. You're an errand of death, dressed up like a man. When you walk through town, the air changes. People stop talking when you pass. Not dramatically, just enough that you notice. A pause that tightens the throat and loosens the step. They nod if they must, but never smile. Children look, then look away. Dogs growl. Shopkeepers place your goods on the counter without touching your hand. Coins are accepted in silence. And when you leave, the broom comes out. Just a few gentle strokes, as if your footprints need scrubbing. You've learned to take the long way around, through the back lanes, past the tanneries and middens. You don't mind the smell anymore. It smells like work, like things that have a purpose. Sometimes you catch sight of yourself in a window pane and don't recognise the man looking back. Not because you've changed that much, but because you've become something no one looks at for long. Even your reflection seems reluctant. There are moments, small forgettable ones, when you wonder what it would be like to be ordinary again. To sit in the tavern without an empty bench forming around you like a moat. To laugh too loudly and not have the room go still. To place your hand on someone's shoulder without them flinching like they've been touched by a ghost. But then the wind shifts, and you remember the scent of blood that clings to your boots. No matter how well you scrub, the priest visits once a month, not to confess, just to deliver news from the magistrate or collect the stipend for burial fees. He stands by the door with his hands folded and his mouth tight. You offer him tea and he always declines. You ask if the bishop has written back. He always says no. You know what he's thinking. Whether or not men like you have souls to save, whether mercy extends past the scaffold. You want to ask him, but you don't. You both prefer the silence. Your dreams have changed. Once they were just echoes, half-formed memories of fields, firelight, faces you've since forgotten. Now they're sharper. You dream of rope burns and wooden wheels, of flames that don't die and screams that won't stop. You wake up cold, heart pounding, breath held like you're the one with your neck on the block. You drink from the flask beside your bed and wait for the dawn to remind you you're still alive. Most days that's all the proof you get. The tools hang on the wall like old sins. You've arranged them carefully. Blade, rope, garrote, hammer, sword. Each has its place. Each has its weight. Sometimes you run your fingers along the edges in the dark, not to test them, but to reassure yourself they're still there. They're your company now, more reliable than neighbours, quieter than friends. They don't look away when you speak. You've stopped attending festivals, even when invited, which is rare. The last time you went, you stood near the edge of the crowd while everyone danced in loops and circles, laughing into their cups and pretending the world was kind. No one asked you to join. A boy pointed at you and whispered something. His mother pulled him close. You left before the bread was passed around. On the way home, you stepped in something soft and didn't bother wiping it off. You keep a journal, not daily. Just when something gets too loud in your head to ignore, it's mostly lists, names, dates, weather reports, how long it took the body to die. You don't know why you record it. No one will read it. It won't be kept in a monastery or displayed in a library. Maybe it's just to remind yourself that you existed, that someone at some point kept count. You've noticed your shadow has begun to feel unfamiliar, longer, slightly bowed, as if the job has started reshaping you from the inside out. Your posture has changed. You stoop a little now, even when the load is light. Your fingers twitch when you're idle. Your eyes flinch at sudden movement. You've become the thing people imagine in nightmares, and you're still expected to show up on time, sober, with your blade clean. There are good days. You don't talk about them, but they happen. A fresh loaf left anonymously on your stoop. A warm fire that doesn't smoke. A moment of stillness in the woods behind your home, where the birds forget who you are. You sit on a stump with your coat pulled tight and watch the trees move. You don't think about gallows. You don't think about names. You just breathe. But then the knock comes, the summons, the name and the time. You put on your coat. You check the axe. You step into your boots and into your role. The house becomes a memory again, and you return to being the thing the town needs, but won't speak of once the work is done. That night you return home, hang up the blade, strip off your coat, and sit at the table with a bowl of barley and a tin cup of something bitter. The window creaks in the wind. The walls creak back. When peasants die, they scream. When nobles die, they perform. That's the first real difference you notice. It's not about pain, not really. Everyone feels the same when the blade touches bone. But peasants curse, they flail, they beg, or they spit, or they collapse at the last second and have to be dragged back to the block like a sack of wet grain. Nobles don't do that. Nobles make speeches. Nobles wear linen shirts that cost more than your year's wages. Nobles want their death to be remembered, which means they want you to disappear into the scenery. The execution must be clean, dignified, and above all, beautiful. Like a tragedy, like a sermon, like the end of a story that was always going to end this way. You don't get to choose who you kill. That's the court's job. But you do notice how the method always shifts depending on who the condemned used to be. A peasant caught stealing bread from the bishop's pantry gets the noose. Quick, dirty, done before breakfast. A merchant who offended the wrong official might get the garrote, indoors of course, where no one can see the bruising. But a nobleman, even one convicted of treason or murder, gets a sword. Always the sword. The same blade you polish once a month and only ever use when the crowd includes people wearing fur. They don't die on the block either. That would be too crude. Instead, you use the low scaffold, 4 steps high, draped in black, with velvet curtains if the budget allows. The condemned kneels on a fine cushion, hands bound in silk cord, eyes lifted to the sky as if waiting for applause. There's usually a priest, and sometimes a bard to record the last words. A herald might announce the sentence in a voice trembling with importance, and you, executioner, labourer, nameless ghost, stand behind the noble with your sword drawn and your face covered, if they request it. Some do. They don't want to see your eyes when they go. Others ask to look at you. You've never understood which is worse. You rehearse for these deaths, literally. The day before a highborn execution, you're summoned to the magistrate's hall to walk through the steps. Timing, pacing, posture. You're told to enter from the left, bow without slouching, raise the blade at a precise angle, and wait for the signal. Usually a nod from someone with a ring too large for their hand. Then you're to strike once, only once, and in perfect silence. No grunting, no stumbling, no blood on the cushion, if you can help it. You've practiced hitting a watermelon with your eyes closed. You've studied vertebrae in drawings made by men who've never had to clean the blood off their boots. Nobles die like they expect to be remembered. They speak of duty, of legacy, of forgiveness. They invoke God, country, and family in the same breath. Sometimes they weep, but never before the audience. One man kissed his signet ring and handed it to his mistress. Another requested his favourite psalm, then recited it himself when the priest forgot the words. You're never part of the story, not allowed, but you're in it. Always just off stage, blade lifted, waiting for your cue. When the head falls, they cheer, or cry, or throw roses. Once, someone threw coins. You didn't pick them up. You treat those executions like surgery. You lay out the tools beforehand, check the grip, feel the blade's balance in your hands. You walk the length of the scaffold twice to spot any loose boards. You measure the height of the kneeling platform so the angle is just right. You avoid wine the night before. You sleep if you can. The sword has no edge for mistakes. One bad cut and you'll never hear the end of it. Not from the crowd, not from the bishop, not from the family who will swear they saw the eyelids twitch as the head rolled. You've seen what happens when an executioner misses. You've been what happens. Peasant deaths are different. There's no rehearsal, no silk cords, no final statements worth etching into stone. They die in the mud, or on the scaffold behind the jail, or at the edge of a ditch that saves the gravedigger some trouble. The crowd still comes, of course, but not for ceremony. They come for sport. They throw rotten fruit. They chant. They take bets on whether the rope will hold or the head will bounce. You don't have to bow or stand straight or wear clean gloves. But if you stumble, If the blade sticks or the noose snaps, they'll turn on you in a heartbeat. Peasant or noble, the crowd wants blood that fits their expectations. And yet, despite all that, you notice something strange. The peasants die afraid. But the nobles, they die convinced. Not of innocence, not even of justice, but of significance. They believe their death means something, that it proves a point, makes history, marks a turning. And maybe it does. Maybe their heads roll farther than most. But you're the one who has to pick it up. You're the one who scrapes blood from the edge of the stage while the crowd disperses. You're the one who watches the sun rise the next morning like nothing happened. You've started keeping 2 sets of tools, one for the rabble, one for the spectacle, the axe for the mob, heavy and indifferent, the sword for the stage, gleaming and precise, the noose, always ready, the garrote rarely spoken of. You store them in separate chests, oiled and wrapped according to their purpose. You never mix them, not out of superstition, out of respect for the job, not the person. They made you the hand of justice. You figured you might as well keep it clean. There are times, after a particularly grand affair, when someone thanks you. Not directly, not by name, but with a nod, a folded coin, a subtle word from a clerk who's had too much wine. You're not supposed to exist in the aftermath, but sometimes they acknowledge the craft. And sometimes, when a noble family requests that the body be prepared for burial, they ask that you handle it. He would have preferred it, one widow told you, eyes hollow. You don't know if she was lying. You do it anyway. But gratitude is fleeting. Perfection is expected. And failure is unforgivable. You've seen executioners driven out of towns for a misaligned swing, for a scream that lasted too long, for the crime of showing their face. One man you knew, only briefly, was hanged with the same rope he'd used the week before. They said he'd botched a baroness. You don't ask for details, you just practice more. You just grip tighter. You just hope no one notices your hands starting to shake in the mornings. You get paid double for noble deaths. That's the policy. Not officially, but always. You're handed the coins in a folded cloth, never counted aloud and never questioned. It's understood that killing with style costs more. But the irony sticks, because when the job isn't clean, when the noble twitches or the sword drags or the cushion stains, you're the villain again, the professional who failed, the instrument that faltered, the blade that didn't show respect. You get paid double to kill with style and blamed when it isn't poetic. The crowd is never satisfied. They chant, they cheer, they spit. Some days they throw turnips. Other days, it's just stones small enough to escape official notice. They gather early, hours before the scaffold is swept clean and the condemned is led out. They bring their children, their wine, their knives to peel fruit with. Execution Day is a kind of holiday, one sanctioned by the state, blessed by the church, and fueled by the hunger of a crowd that never quite gets full. You feel their eyes before you step into view. The murmurs rise like smoke. Sometimes they chant your name, sometimes they don't. You prefer it when they don't. You've learned to read the crowd's mood the way a sailor reads the sea. Sometimes they come for justice, sometimes for entertainment, sometimes for distraction. A famine year brings louder laughter, a hard winter brings sharper curses. When taxes rise, they jeer louder. When a noble escapes punishment, they scream for blood the next time a beggar is sentenced. You're not the author of their anger, but you're the one holding the knife when it crests. You're the moment they all lean forward. You're the proof that someone will pay, even if it's not the right person. The worst part isn't the violence, it's the expectation. They don't just want death, they want a death that makes them feel something. Catharsis, maybe, vindication, joy. You're supposed to deliver it cleanly, quickly, and with just enough spectacle to justify the time they spent finding a place to stand. If it's too fast, they boo. If it's too slow, they scream. If the condemned doesn't beg or flail or shout something scandalous, they grow restless and angry. They want a story, and you're supposed to be the punctuation mark. You've seen men turn savage in the presence of a scaffold. Otherwise decent folk, the baker, the carpenter, the man who sharpened your axe once, suddenly grinning like wolves, shouting things they'd never say in church. The anonymity of the crowd turns people strange. They want to see the body twitch. They want to see the blade stick. They want to tell their neighbours, I was there when it happened. You start to recognise the regulars. A woman with a mole above her eye, who always brings a child, even when the condemned is a woman. A man with one tooth who sells walnuts and sings filthy rhymes during the wait. A group of boys who try to sneak closer each time, daring each other to touch the block before you arrive. You do your job well as anyone can. You keep your hands steady. You speak only when required. You clean the blade between uses, wear the same coat, keep the same pace. You give the condemned a chance to speak if allowed. You nod at the priest. You wait for the signal. You swing. And when it's done cleanly, the crowd forgets you. They cheer for the moment, for the death, for the drama, but not for you. You're the silent machinery behind the curtain. The technician who pressed the button at the exact right time. There's no glory in doing it well, just absence. But when you miss, when the rope breaks or the axe catches or the condemned screams too long, they remember your name. They tell stories. They embellish. They call you a drunk, a sadist, a monster, a coward. They whisper that your hands shook on purpose, that you enjoy it, that you fumbled because you were paid to. Children act out the moment in the streets. Like this, one says, miming a half swing with a stick. Then he missed and hit his shoulder instead, they laugh. They repeat it again and again until it becomes the only version anyone remembers. The first time you botch an execution, it's not entirely your fault. The man twists at the last second. A guard loses grip. You are just too late. The blade strikes wrong. It takes 3 more blows to finish it. You do it. You complete the job. But the silence that follows is worse than any jeering. They look at you differently after that, like you've dropped a tray at a feast, like you've spoiled something sacred. You bury the man yourself afterward, just to feel like you've done something right. But the next day, the butcher's boy makes a joke behind your back, and you realise it didn't matter. You try to be invisible. You wear dull colours. You keep your face down. You nod, but don't greet. You leave before the crowd disperses. You avoid the market on feast days. It doesn't help. They still recognise you. They still point. You become something worse than feared. You become a story. The man who took 5 swings. The one who dropped the sword. The one who made the Duchess faint. It doesn't matter that only one of those things is true. Once the story spreads, it becomes more powerful than the truth. The magistrates don't care as long as the paperwork is clean. The priest mutters something about forgiveness. The guards keep their distance, but not in anger, just habit. You begin to walk differently, slower, more careful. You take longer to check the tools. You spend twice as much time sharpening, practicing, pacing. You rehearse the swing in your sleep. You do everything you can to avoid another mistake. And you still wake each morning wondering if today's the day the crowd finally turns. And sometimes they do. You've seen it happen. You've seen crowds boil over, not because of the condemned, but because they didn't get what they came for. Once, in a neighbouring town, they pulled the executioner off the scaffold and beat him to death with his own tools. Another time, someone set fire to the platform after a hanging was declared too quick. There's a kind of madness that grips people when they feel cheated of their spectacle. You're never more aware of that than when you walk up the steps with a blade in your hand and 1,000 eyes on your back. You've started listening to the crowd. Not their words. Those are mostly filth, but their tone. You can tell when they're hungry for pain, when they're bored, when they're desperate for something to feel righteous about. You adjust accordingly. You speak a little louder. You give the condemned more time. You step aside just long enough for the crowd to lean in. It's not compassion, it's crowd control. You're not just killing a person, you're managing a performance. And the audience is the real danger. It wears on you. Not the blood, not the bones, not even the screams. The crowd is what rots you from the inside. Their need, their glee, their rage. You start to feel like a mirror held up to their worst selves. You give them what they ask for, and they reward you by pretending you don't exist, unless you slip. Then they remember you too well. You walk home the long way now, through the trees, past the edge of the cemetery, where the bones are still too fresh to rest easy. You keep your hood up, your shoulders low, your blade wrapped tight in cloth like a wound you can't show. There are no cheers on your walk back, no nods, no gratitude, just the slow ache in your spine and the sound of boots on gravel. You reach your door and the silence settles around you like a coat. You walk home with your head down. They only love you when you fail. You often find yourself wondering, if the law calls it justice, does that make it holy? You've never been sure. The magistrates say yes, the crowd doesn't care. But the priest, the one who's supposed to know, never gives you an answer. He gives last rites to the condemned. He gives sermons to the living. He gives comfort to the grieving. But when it comes to you, he gives nothing at all. The priest gives last rites, but never to you. He kneels beside the condemned with a cross in one hand and a flask of holy water in the other, murmuring the same Latin phrases he said 100 times before. He blesses the head. He blesses the chest. He places 2 fingers on the forehead and whispers a name that no longer matters. Sometimes the condemned weeps. Sometimes they flinch. Sometimes they go still. Like the blessing itself is a kind of death. Then the priest stands, gives a solemn nod, and steps aside. That's when you step forward. He doesn't look at you as you pass. He never does. It wasn't always like that. When you first took the job, he offered you a blessing of your own. A simple one. For strength, for clarity. He said it with a tight smile, like a man offering a drink to someone he doesn't quite trust. You bowed your head. You were grateful. He avoided you for 3 weeks afterward. And when you asked him, quietly, respectfully, whether absolution applied to executioners, he gave you an answer you still turn over in your head. We pray for all souls, he said, but not all souls ask to be forgiven. You wonder sometimes if you're meant to ask, whether there's a special form of confession reserved for men like you, something buried in a different book, in a different drawer, never spoken aloud. You know what the church says. The law is sacred. The king is ordained. The justice you carry out is not yours but his. But when you wash blood from your hands with cold water and no one meets your eye, it's hard to believe you're part of any divine plan. And when the priest avoids your home, avoids your name, avoids even saying amen in your presence, you begin to wonder who's lying, him or you. You sit in the back of the chapel sometimes, just to remind yourself the roof hasn't collapsed. You arrive late. You leave early. You never approach the altar. You kneel behind a wooden pillar where the candlelight doesn't quite reach, and you watch the others pray. The cobbler, the widow, the girl with a cleft lip who always sings too loudly. They don't look at you. They never have to. You're part of the chapel's architecture now, a shadow in the corner, part of the cost of living in a world that demands both mercy and punishment in the same breath. There are saints for everything. Soldiers, thieves, lost children, hopeless causes. You check once out of curiosity. There's no patron saint for executioners. Closest you find is Saint Dismas, the thief crucified beside Christ. Not the worst company, but hardly comforting. You light a candle anyway. Not for yourself, for the ones who looked you in the eye, for the ones who smiled or joked or forgave you when they had no reason to. You don't remember all their names, but you remember the tilt of their heads, the way the ropes creaked, the silence that followed. The priest never asks you to confession. You stopped asking years ago. When you speak to God now, it's in your own voice. Not Latin, not kneeling, just small mutterings before sleep. A thank you, if the blade struck clean. An apology, if it didn't. You tell yourself he understands, that he sees the difference between murder and duty, that he knows how much you wish someone else had been chosen, that he sees the days when your hands tremble and the nights when your dreams return in the colour of ash and bone. Sometimes you imagine judgment, not the kind with fire and horns, the quieter kind. A room with no doors, no windows, just a table and a voice asking, "Do you remember them all?" You don't know what you'd say. You don't know if that voice would be kind, but you think about it. Often. Usually when your heart won't slow, or when you wake to the sound of your own teeth grinding. You keep a list, names, dates, towns. You don't write what they did, just when they died. You don't know if it counts as penance, but it feels like something. There are moments when you envy the condemned, not for their fate, but for the ritual. They receive their last meal, their final prayer, their whispered assurances that God will meet them on the other side. They are given a moment to be human. To be mourned, you are not. You are the thing that happens before mourning begins. The one who holds the blade and therefore forfeits the blessing. They are pitied, you are not. They are remembered, you are deliberately forgotten. You've watched the priest bless men who confess to killing children, to burning farms, to slitting throats in back alleys. He murmurs the same words each time. Forgiveness, redemption, peace. You've never killed anyone who wasn't sentenced. Never taken a life outside the law. But when your name comes up in sermons, it's only as a caution. Even the hand that strikes for justice, he says once, must answer for its violence. He doesn't look at you when he says it, but he doesn't have to. On All Souls' Day, the bells toll for the dead. You wait to hear one for yourself. Just a slip, a mistake, a single clang for the man who died slowly, without being seen. But the bell passes you by. It rings for the merchants, for the children, for the abbess who died with her hands clasped in prayer. It does not ring for executioners. You tell yourself that's fair. You weren't expecting sainthood. Just acknowledgement. You drink that night, not to forget, just to soften the quiet. There's a story the priest tells every spring. The thief who repented at the last second, the soldier who lowered his spear, the criminal who kissed the cross before the fire reached his feet. These are meant to be stories of hope, of last chances, but you've begun to hear them differently. You wonder what story they'll tell about you, if any, or if you'll become part of the myth, the masked man with a black hood, faceless, voiceless, never once offered salvation because no one thought he needed it. Sometimes, when the condemned asks for a prayer and no priest arrives in time, you say one yourself. Not aloud, not properly, just a few words you remember from childhood, muttered under your breath as the rope tightens or the blade lifts. It feels foolish, but it feels wrong to do nothing. You don't know if God hears it. You don't even know if you're speaking it right. But the dead deserve something, and you're the only one left to give it. You've considered writing to the bishop, just to ask, not for recognition, just clarity. You draft the letter 3 times, then burn it in the hearth. You already know the answer. If God is watching, he's watching from very far away, and if he speaks, he does so in silence. You whisper the prayers yourself now, just in case. All of the executed leave something behind. Blood, of course, that's the most obvious. It pools and clots and seeps between the floorboards, if you don't clean it quickly. You've learned the routine. You wait until the crowd disperses, then fetch a pail and a brush. Sometimes a guard helps, usually not. You scrub until the wood lightens, until the flies give up. You wipe the axe clean, re-wrap the rope, toss the soiled cloth in the fire. You used to gag, now you just hum. Some leave teeth, hair, bits of bone if the swing goes wrong. You don't mention these to the magistrates. You just collect what you find and bury it behind your home with the others. A small pit, no markers. You whisper something over the soil, not because you think it helps, but because silence feels worse. You've buried 100 pieces of strangers and can't remember which part belonged to whom. but you remember the weight of the earth as it falls. The bodies, when they aren't claimed, are your problem too. The jailer will help haul them off the scaffold, but after that, it's on you. You drag them to the cart, cover them with a sheet if you have one, and wheel them to the edge of the cemetery, where the unconsecrated ground begins. Sometimes they're dumped in mass graves, sometimes they're burned. Depends on the weather. Depends on how many others died that week. Depends on how much pity the priest can spare. Usually, it's not much. You've learned to wrap the corpses tightly, not just for dignity, but to keep the limbs from shifting. Nothing worse than a hand slipping out mid-journey and brushing your leg like it's asking for something. You sew the cloth shut with rough twine, not because anyone told you to, but because it feels like the right thing to do. It's the only stitch of care most of them will receive. You've become a kind of undertaker by default, not out of kindness, just necessity. Burning takes longer. You stack the wood high and dry, build the pyre tight. If you do it wrong, the fire eats slow and foul. If you do it right, it still smells like boiled leather and marrow. You stand downwind when you can. You don't always succeed. The smoke gets in your coat, your hair, your throat. You don't try to wash it out anymore. You just wait for it to fade. You've started keeping a second shirt, one you only wear when tending the fire. You store it in a box outside your door. The neighbours wouldn't touch it if they were paid. Sometimes the family comes, not often, but now and then a wife appears with red eyes and a bundle of cloth. A brother stands off to the side, arms folded, face pale with something that might be grief or shame or fury. You let them take the body if they ask. You help lift it into the cart. You say nothing. They rarely thank you. You don't blame them. Once a mother tried to strike you. Her hand shook too much to land it. You let her try anyway. Not everyone gets a final resting place. Not really. Some are dumped in pits, one on top of the other, with lime thrown in to speed the rot. Others are burned until nothing remains but teeth and iron buckles. A few are left longer than they should be, when no one can be bothered to finish the job. You've seen bodies bloat in summer heat, bones exposed to the crows, faces eaten away before the spirit is cold. You do what you can. You bury what's left. You light what won't rot fast enough. You learn to work quickly, because if you don't, the stench settles into your skin. You tell yourself it's not your duty to mourn. Your duty is to clean, to dispose, to prepare for the next. But some nights, you find yourself talking to them, quietly, while you sew the shroud or wrap the limbs. You say things like, "You won't be alone," or "It's done now." It's not prayer, it's not pity, just habit, like brushing soot from a coat or nodding at a stranger in the lane. Some part of you needs it, needs to acknowledge the human part that came before the verdict. You've developed rituals, not official ones, not blessed, just your own. You tie the rope a certain way, you fold the hands, you close the eyes if they're still soft enough to move. If not, you place a cloth over the face. You don't like the way they stare. You clean under the nails if there's time. You remove the gag if there is one. You brush the hair back. You tell yourself it's not affection, it's presentation. But sometimes it feels like penance. There's a small shelf above your bed where you keep the tokens, not trophies, just things left behind. A torn ribbon, a copper ring, a carved button. You don't know why you keep them. You don't even remember which body each came from, but throwing them away feels wrong. So you line them up neatly, dust them once a week, and let them sit. Quiet reminders of quiet endings. No one else will remember. Someone ought to. You don't talk to others about any of this. You wouldn't know how to begin. No one asks what happens after the axe falls. They assume the body vanishes, that the blood dries on its own, that the dead bury themselves. You let them believe that. It's easier, cleaner. Let them think you swing once and walk away. Let them believe death is simple. You know better. You know how much work it takes to make something disappear. You dream more often now, not of the dying, but of the dead. Not the screams or the blood. Just faces, eyes, the curl of a lip, the twitch of a hand. You wake with your fingers curled like you've been tying knots in your sleep. You check the corner of the room, half expecting to see a shadow still sitting there. You keep water by the bed now. Sometimes it helps. You dream of the ones who had names, the ones who looked you in the eye. You didn't write the law, you just enforced it. That's what you say when the silence grows too loud. That's what you repeat when the priest won't meet your eye and the neighbours cross themselves as you pass. You didn't decide who lived or died. You didn't sit in judgment. You didn't issue sentences from a cushioned chair in a warm hall. You just did what the parchment said, what the magistrate signed, what the church stamped with its seal and called holy. The rope, the blade, the fire, they aren't yours. They belong to the law. You just happen to hold them. It works most days, the separation, the compartmentalization. You build little walls in your mind and move through them like rooms in a house. One for the morning rituals, boiling water, folding the cloth, checking the edge of the axe. One for the crowd, for the jeering and the laughing and the occasional gasp. One for the swing itself. A moment you keep locked in its own space, separate from before or after. And then another room, darker, where you put everything else. The trembling, the second thoughts, the memory of a man mouthing thank you before you struck. That room stays locked most of the time, but the door creaks. You've learned not to talk to yourself aloud. That was a bad habit you picked up during your first winter alone. You'd mutter phrases while pacing, sometimes prayers, sometimes instructions, sometimes just your own name so you wouldn't forget how it sounded. One morning a washerwoman delivering linens heard you through the door and dropped the basket without knocking. Word spreads quickly in a small town. Now you keep the conversations silent, interior, contained. You nod instead of speaking. You write things down instead of asking aloud. It feels safer that way. You drink, not heavily, not at first, just enough to sleep when the dreams start repeating. You tell yourself it's for the ache in your hands, the tension in your jaw, the slow grind in your knees from hauling too many bodies in too much rain. It's practical, medicinal. You buy cheap red wine from a vendor who never looks you in the face. You drink it from a chipped mug you've had since before the work began. You take slow sips and listen to the fire crackle. You watch the shadows flicker across the ceiling and pretend you're somewhere else. The wine helps. It blurs the edges, makes the names quieter. You stop dreaming in full colour. The vivid reds and yellows turn to washed out greys and browns. Like an old mural that's been scraped too many times. The faces in your dreams lose detail. You can still tell who they were, but their mouths no longer move. Their eyes no longer follow you. It's a mercy. One you're not sure you deserve, but one you take anyway. There are nights you go without, just to see if you still can. You light a candle, sit by the window, and listen to the wind rattle the shutters. You watch your hands tremble and tell yourself it's the cold. You focus on the rhythm of your breath, the creak of the chair, the crack of your knuckles. You recite psalms you don't believe and imagine they're working. Sometimes they do. Sometimes you lie awake until dawn, too tired to cry, too numb to move. You start talking less, even when you must. You give instructions with a glance. You nod instead of answering. You let the guards fill the silence with crude jokes and hollow laughter. You smile when required. You look stern when expected. You become something quiet, heavy, solid. People treat you like a tool, and you find yourself becoming one, defined by function, maintained only as long as you're sharp. It's easier than pretending to be a man. You tell yourself this is just the cost, that every trade has its weight. The blacksmith carries burns. The farmer carries blisters. You carry this, blood that never quite washes out, a silence that grows heavier by the year. You try to measure it, try to name it, try to believe it's survivable, but some days it feels like a second skin, tight, wet, impossible to peel away. You used to wonder what your life might have been. Before the work. Before the shack at the edge of town. You used to imagine a small shop. Shoemaking, maybe, or tanning, or cart repair. Something simple. Something normal. But that version of you has grown distant, faded. You don't think of him often anymore. When you do, it's like remembering a character in a story someone else told. You wonder if he ever really existed. You wonder if he would have had kinder hands. When you pass a mirror now, you avoid looking too closely. Not out of shame, but because you don't recognise what stares back. The lines beneath your eyes have deepened. Your posture has sagged. Your mouth is flatter. Not sad, not angry, just blank. Worn down like a stone under rain. You've stopped trying to smile when it's not needed. The muscles resist it now. It feels dishonest. You think of quitting sometimes. Just leaving the tools behind. Walking until the road turns into forest. And disappearing somewhere no one knows your name. But then what? There's no other job waiting. No town that wants what you've become. You'd starve, or beg, or worse, get caught and sent to the same scaffold you once stood beside. That's the cruel joke. The man who swings the axe doesn't get to run. He just keeps swinging until someone younger, steadier, colder comes along to take his place. So you stay. You sharpen the blade, you tie the knots, you light the fires and scrub the block and whisper prayers you no longer believe in. You open the ledger, you mark the name, you nod to the priest, you hold the line. The wine helps, but not every night. Some nights the house creaks too much and the silence presses too close. You sit by the fire and stare at the same knot in the wall for an hour, waiting for the stillness to shift. It doesn't. No one knocks. No one visits. You haven't had a guest in years and you wouldn't know what to offer them if they did come. There's nothing in the cupboards but dried barley and salted meat. The good chair has a crack running through the leg. You only ever light one candle. You don't live alone because you want to. You live alone because everyone else decided that's what you deserve. The house is quiet. Always. Too quiet. You talk to the fire sometimes, just to hear a voice. Even that feels like trespassing. You stopped writing letters. There was no one left to send them to. Even the priest no longer stops by. The town pays your wages by leaving them on a stone by the chapel door. No note, no message, just a pouch of coin, and the occasional scrap of news folded inside, unsigned. At first you tried keeping the house tidy, not for pride, just to give your hands something to do. You swept, you patched the roof, you straightened the books on the shelf, even the ones you couldn't read anymore because the ink had faded or the Latin never stuck. But over time, you stopped bothering. The dust comes back no matter what. The wind pulls shingles loose as soon as you nail them down. The garden never took root. The well sometimes goes dry, and when it does, no one brings water. You hear laughter from the village sometimes carried on the wind. It doesn't sound cruel, just ordinary. People living, talking, passing bread and jokes and gossip across tables you're never invited to sit at. You don't resent them for it, but it carves a hollow all the same. You've learned to stop listening. You shut the shutters early and let the dark settle in before the voices reach your ears. Your name isn't said aloud unless someone's been arrested. That's when the guards come to the door, slip a note under the latch and leave without knocking. No eye contact, no words, just the sentence, the date, the method. They assume you'll be ready. You always are. The house has become part of the process now, as forgettable as the rope or the block. A grim little box that produces death on command, then folds back into the hillside like it was never there. You sometimes wonder if the house will outlast you, if the wood will rot before someone decides to tear it down, if the floorboards will still groan underfoot years after your boots stop pressing them. You've started marking days on the wall, not to count them, but to prove they happened. The chalk fades quickly, damp seeps in. Sometimes you redraw them, sometimes you let them go. There's a corner by the hearth where the tools used to rest, back when you thought you needed them close at hand. Now they stay in the chest by the door, wrapped in cloth, locked with rusted iron. You no longer check them nightly. You know their weight. You know their feel. You know how often they haunt your thoughts. Even when you're sitting still, doing nothing. That's enough. No one steals from your home. Not because it's well guarded, because it's not, but because no one wants to touch anything that belongs to you. Once, a child dared another to knock on your door. He made it halfway down the path before turning back, pale and shaking. You watched from the window, unseen. The next morning, someone had scratched a mark into the post, 3 lines crossed with 1. You don't know what it means. You didn't wipe it away. The house smells of old wood and ash. A hint of vinegar where you clean the counters. Metal from the tools. Damp from the roof. Your coat never quite dries in winter. You hang it by the fire and sit nearby with your feet pulled close, pretending you're somewhere else. A tavern, maybe. A library. A room where people speak your name with something other than disgust or fear. You know you're pretending. You do it anyway. Sometimes the wind pushes the shutters open and the sound makes you flinch. You reach for a knife without thinking. Not because you expect danger, just because it's instinct now. You live like a stray dog guarding a pile of bones no one wants. The hearth's warm, but the rest of the house stays cold. You keep the door bolted even when you're home, especially when you're home. You've caught yourself speaking aloud in the evenings, just to hear a voice echo off the walls. Not conversation, not anything meaningful, just words, names, phrases from books, things you remember from before. They sound strange now, like someone else is saying them. You stop when it gets too quiet again. The worst part is how familiar it's become. The silence, the distance. You stopped flinching when the townspeople turned their backs. You stopped expecting answers when you greeted someone. You forgot what it felt like to be surprised by kindness. You don't expect visitors. You wouldn't know how to welcome them if they came. The only time you see another face up close is when it's about to die. You once tried leaving bread on the chapel step, anonymous, wrapped in cloth. A thank you, perhaps, or an apology. You never saw it again. The next week, a dead crow appeared on your doorstep. Not fresh, not natural, arranged almost, its wings folded, its eyes gone. You buried it without comment. You didn't try again. You've become your own weather. Cold in the mornings, damp in the bones, silent by nightfall. You track the seasons by how badly the wind howls through the gaps in your walls. You learn when to light the fire early, when to brace the door, when to keep the candle low so no one sees the light and remembers you still live here. You don't lock the chest every night anymore. You used to, out of habit. Now you wonder what it would matter if someone took the axe or the rope. Who would use them? Who would want them? The town has made it clear. They need you, but only from a distance, only when necessary, only when no one else wants to touch the blade. There's no family waiting at the table, no voice asking when you'll be home, no second pair of boots by the door. You once thought that might change, that you'd grow into something more than this, but the job doesn't leave room. It takes, slowly, quietly, without violence, just emptiness, shaped like duty. You speak less each year, and the house listens more. The condemned make requests occasionally. Some ask you to make it fast, others ask you to make it slow. Not many, but enough that you start to notice the difference. There's a pause when they look you in the eye, when they realise they're speaking to the last face they'll ever see. That pause, shorter for some, longer for others, tells you more than any prayer or protest. You learn to recognise it, the way a man's jaw tightens, the way a woman's fingers twitch at the rope around her wrists, the way someone nods, not to you, but to themselves. You stand there, quiet, steady, listening to whatever they choose to offer before the final silence. They don't always beg. In fact, most don't. They ask questions instead. Will it hurt? Will they bury me with my brother? Does the priest really believe I'm damned? You answer when you can. truthfully when possible, and kindly when it's not. You've developed a tone for it, gentle, matter-of-fact, almost priest-like. It's not a lie, but it is an act. You've learned that people want a certain rhythm in their final moments, something that sounds like assurance even when you have none to give. You try to honour their requests when they come, within reason. One man asked to face east, one woman asked to wear her wedding dress. Another, a drunkard with 3 teeth and a smell like vinegar-soaked leather, asked for you to spit on his grave. So I don't die too clean. You nodded. You never did. But you thought about it. Some requests are stranger than others. One man asked for a chicken to hold. No one knew why. You gave him one. He smiled the whole way to the block. You start to categorise them, not formally, just in your mind. The shouters, the weepers, the stone-faced, the laughers, the ones who make jokes that aren't funny, and the ones who don't speak at all. You remember the odd ones most. The woman who recited a shopping list under her breath. The priest who insisted on hearing your confession before he'd accept last rites. The soldier who saluted the crowd, then wet himself. These things stay with you, not because they're tragic or meaningful, but because they're human. And human is harder to forget. You've had people try to bribe you, to look the other way, to loosen the rope, to aim high, to miss on purpose. One man offered you land. Another, a ring you still keep in the bottom of a drawer. You didn't take either offer seriously. There's no future in helping the already doomed. You nod, pretend to consider it, then carry on as instructed. You're not cruel about it, just practiced. They wouldn't thank you for a slow death anyway, and no one ever remembers the favours you try to give. Children are the hardest, not many, only a handful over the years, but enough to haunt the spaces between your sleep. The law doesn't like calling them children, once they're condemned. Enemy, traitor, witch, anything to make the hands around the rope feel cleaner. But when they look at you, they still look like children. Wide-eyed, too small, too stunned to cry. One asked for her doll. Another just asked if her mother would be watching. You told her no. You hoped you were right. You try not to speak more than necessary. Not for formality, just for self-preservation. Words make things softer, realer. The condemned will search your face for softness, and if they find it, they'll use it. They'll tell you their story, their version, their mistake, and you'll listen because you're human, and humans crave stories, even when they end badly. But afterward, you carry their voices with you, in the shack, in the dreams, in the silence between axe swings. You keep your mouth shut more often now. Still, there are some you remember, not because they deserved it, but because something about them carved a notch in your mind. One man said nothing at all, but winked before he knelt. A merchant, you think, smiled like he knew a secret you never would. Another asked if you believed in ghosts. You didn't answer. He laughed like that was the answer. Then he asked you to whistle something as you swung. You didn't. But afterward the tune stuck in your head for days. There are the ones who believe they're innocent, truly, deeply. Eyes burning with conviction, voices steady, hands raised in protest. Until the end. Sometimes they curse the judge. Sometimes they curse you. One woman called you a dog with hands. You didn't disagree. You try to look them in the eye when it happens, not out of defiance, just so someone sees them die. And then there are the guilty ones, the obviously guilty, the ones who grin as the charges are read, who lean into the spectacle like it's a game. They frighten you more than the rest. Not because they enjoy it, but because they understand it. They know they're part of something bigger than justice or punishment. They're feeding the crowd, fueling the machine. Some of them thank you, not mockingly, genuinely, as if you've given them a stage, a final moment of clarity. You nod, but the moment sits poorly. You don't want gratitude, you want them gone. There are times, rare but real, when the condemned forgives you, without prompting, without pity, just looks at you and says something like, "I know it's not your fault," or "You're just doing the job." The first time it happened, you nodded. The second time, you felt your stomach turn. The third time, you nearly wept. You don't like it. Forgiveness feels heavier than blame. It's harder to carry. You'd rather be hated. It's simpler that way. The worst part isn't the rage, it's the moments of grace, the flicker of humanity in someone's eyes just before they fall. The way a hand stops trembling when they accept the end. The strange intimacy of holding someone's shoulder steady while they kneel, knowing they'll never stand again. You don't touch anyone in your daily life, but here you press your palm to the back of a neck. Here you whisper instructions. Here you offer the only human contact some of them will know as they go. Once, someone asked if they could sing a song. You said yes. They sang quietly, off-key, but with such trembling pride it made the crowd go silent. You waited until the last note faded before raising the blade. Afterward, someone in the crowd clapped. Just once. You didn't turn to see who. You never found out the name of the tune, but you hum it sometimes without thinking. You've learnt not to judge. Not really. The guilty and the innocent blur after a while. The proud and the ashamed die the same. The only thing that changes is how much they carry with them and how much they leave behind. You're not there to decide who deserved what. You're just there to make sure it ends. And some look at you like they already forgave you. Those are the worst. You don't judge them. Not anymore. Not the beggars who curse you. Not the nobles who ask for silk. Not the ones who cry or sing or stare past you like you're already a ghost. You listen. You do the job. You walk away. But their faces follow you home, and their voices settle into the corners of your mind like dust. You carry them all, even the ones who asked you to forget. Lately, though, it's not just memory weighing you down. It's your hands, your breath, the way your knees don't bend quite the way they used to. You've stood still for so long that now, when you need to move, you can feel the slowness creeping in. You still show up, still swing true, but something's changing. You feel it in the wood of the platform, in the silence of the crowd, in the way the axe doesn't rest as easily, in your grip as it once did. Your hands shake now. Not always, just in the mornings, just before a storm, just after you've slept badly, which is most nights. You try to hide it, press your palms flat against the table, grip the mug with both hands, pretend it's the cold, but you feel it creeping in, a soft tremble that begins in your knuckles and spreads like damp through stone. The first time it happened during a job, you blamed the wind. The second time, you said nothing. The third, you saw the guard glance down, then away. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. It's not just your hands. Your knees ache. Your back tightens. The axe feels heavier than it used to. The stairs to the scaffold seem taller. You've started bracing yourself subtly. As you walk, adjusting your weight, keeping your steps deliberate. You wake up slower, stiff and dull, and it takes longer for your breath to even out. You tell yourself it's age, normal, expected, but executioners aren't allowed to age. You're not a priest or a merchant. No one wants to see the hangman grow old. You try to compensate. You sharpen the blade longer. Practice swings before dawn. Keep your tools so clean you can see your reflection in the steel. But none of that matters when your grip slips. When you miss the timing by half a second. When your boot catches on a loose board and the crowd makes a sound that's not quite laughter and not quite disgust. The condemned notices, so does the magistrate. You finish the job cleanly, but you hear the silence that follows. It's the kind of silence people use to decide things behind closed doors. You weren't always like this. You remember when your hands were steady, when your steps were firm, when you could hold the axe for hours without your shoulders burning. But that man feels distant now. You can recall how he moved, how he stood, how he spoke, but not how he felt. That version of you was younger, hungrier, less aware of what was being taken, piece by piece with each job. You've lost more than strength. You've lost distance. The emotional walls you built are crumbling at the edges, and you feel the weight of each death pressing in, more vivid now than ever before. The crowd sees it too. You've noticed how they whisper, how they lean to one another when you ascend the platform. You catch snatches of words, old, slower, shaky. They still come, still cheer, still demand the show, but their expectations are sharper now, less forgiving. You've become a performer who stayed on stage too long. They want a cleaner spectacle, a younger face, a blade that doesn't hesitate. The guards no longer meet you at the door. They leave notes now, folded, unsigned, impersonal. The assignments are still regular, but there's a tone to them. Too brief, too formal, as if already preparing for someone else to take your place. The priest hasn't looked you in the eye in months. You pass him in the street, and he turns his head like he's thinking of something holy, something far away. You used to get nods from the magistrate. Now it's just parchment, a name, a time, no questions, no instructions. They assume you still remember how. You do. That's the irony. You remember everything now. The movements, the pressure, the weight distribution of each swing. But your body lags behind the knowledge. It resists. You've started feeling it after each execution. The way the ache in your wrists lingers, the slow pull in your spine when you bend to clean the platform. You rest more, but rest doesn't fix it. It just dulls it until the next time. You've begun rehearsing your own farewell in your head. Not a speech, just a way to leave. You think of what you'll take with you. The whetstone, the small chest, maybe the ledger. You don't own much. No one in your position does. But you imagine walking away, no crowd, no ceremony, just locking the door and vanishing like smoke. You don't expect a replacement to knock on your door. They'll find their own tools. The town will provide. They always do. The man who held the job before you didn't leave cleanly. You never met him. Just heard the stories. Hands went bad, started missing, took to drink. One day he didn't show up. They found him in a field with a broken bottle and a rusted axe beside him. They never told you what happened to the body. You think of him now, more often than you'd like, not as a warning, just as a pattern, a familiar ending. You'd hoped once there might be a pension, a quiet cottage somewhere, a life spent fishing or reading or walking through woods where no one knew your name. But there's no fund for men like you, no retirement, no golden years, just the slow decay of function, followed by silence. They don't honour executioners when they retire. They erase them, like a chalk mark washed away after the lesson's done. You hear rumours that a younger man's been seen near the courthouse, talking with the clerk, asking questions about tools. You don't ask for confirmation. You already know. The guards speak less to you. The townspeople no longer lower their eyes when you pass. They look straight at you now. Not with fear, with impatience, as if wondering why you're still here, as if expecting you to read the signs. You think of stopping before they ask, handing in the key, leaving on your own terms. But even that feels performative now, like you're giving a gift no one asked for. You imagine standing in the magistrate's office, explaining yourself. He'd nod, maybe offer a token word of thanks. More likely, he'd already have a letter drawn up, folded, ready. They've been preparing for your end longer than you have. You still show up, still swing when required, still clean the blade and wash the blood and say the small prayer you've always said when it's over. But you know the margin has shrunk. There's no room left for mistake. One slip, one stumble, one scream that lasts a second too long, and you'll be gone. Not in disgrace, just in absence, quietly, efficiently, forgotten. You're told you'll be replaced, quietly, efficiently, like you never existed. A month after your last job, they built a monument to justice. Your name isn't on it. It stands near the town square. White stone, tall, clean, etched with names of judges, magistrates, aldermen. Men who wore robes held gavels, signed papers in ink that's long since faded. There's a plaque listing the dates of great trials, the names of criminals brought to heel, the laws passed in solemn halls, behind doors you were never invited through. There is no mention of the block, or the rope, or the men who made the sentences final. You walk past it sometimes, not on purpose. It's just near the market, near the place where coins change hands, and bread is weighed and no one remembers what you did last week, as long as the scaffold's been cleaned. You glance at it, briefly, then look away. There's a statue on top, blindfolded, sword in hand, scales in the other. She never held a whetstone. She never scraped blood off the floor. You used to wonder what people thought happened after the verdict. If they imagined justice came down from the heavens like fire. If they believed the sentence fulfilled itself, quick and painless, without sweat, without labour, without hands. You were the hands, you were the weight, the hinge, the mechanism no one looked at, but everyone relied on. You made the thing real. You made it stick. And now, they pretend you were never there. There's a new man now. You haven't seen his face, but you've seen the way people look when they mention him. Curious, not fearful, as if he's some novelty. Young, clean, well-spoken maybe, or just quiet enough that people haven't decided what to fear yet. You don't hold it against him. Everyone has to start somewhere. You just hope he learns faster than you did, and that he sharpens his own blades. Your house stands empty now, the hearth cold, the tools gone, or boxed or taken. You packed only what you needed, left behind the chair with the cracked leg, the cot with its uneven slats, the ledger with names that stretched too far back for you to want to read them again. You stood in the doorway for a long time before leaving, listening to the stillness, trying to decide if the house missed you already. It didn't. There's no farewell, no coin purse, no letter of gratitude. You step down from your post like stepping off a scaffold. Quiet, unnoticed, barely a sound. You pass the magistrate's hall and the door doesn't open. You pass the chapel and the priest keeps speaking as though nothing has changed. And he's right. Nothing has, not really. You leave and someone else takes the blade. The system continues. The ledger gets another page. The rope gets another knot. You think about writing a letter to someone. Anyone. Just to say you were here, but there's no one who'd read it. And even if they did, what would you say? That you served? That you obeyed? That you made clean work of dirty orders? That you bore witness to the worst of men and still found ways to sleep most nights? There's no poetry in that. No redemption, just fact. The road ahead is empty. You don't know where it leads. That used to scare you. Now it feels like relief. You pass travellers and nod without speaking. No one recognises you. No one recoils. It's almost disorienting being anonymous again. Being just another man with sore knees and a pack slung over his shoulder. You don't know how long it will last. Maybe forever. Maybe just until someone asks your name and hears something familiar in your voice. You find yourself in a quiet grove, just beyond the edge of a forgotten village. There's a stump there, smooth from age, ringed by moss and scattered leaves. It reminds you of the block. You sit on it, just for a moment. Not to reflect, just to rest. The birds sing like they've never heard of gallows. The wind moves through the trees like it has better places to be. You close your eyes and listen. When you open them, you realise your hands are resting in your lap. Still, steady. No tremor, just old hands, wrinkled and calloused and finally at peace. You feel the ache in your back, the tightness in your shoulders, but not like before, not like punishment. Just age, just the weight of having endured something no one thanked you for. You reach into the pack and remove the cloth-wrapped bundle. It's lighter now, familiar. You unwrap it slowly, like a priest handling relics. Inside is the axe head. Not the first you ever used. That one is long gone. But one that served you well. Cleaned often, sharpened religiously. Trusted. You cradle the axe head in both hands, not like a weapon, but like a memory. It reflects the light gently, without malice. You run a thumb along the flat of it, not the edge. You don't need the edge anymore. You stand and walk to a hollow near the tree line. Not a grave exactly, just a space. A place where the earth seems soft and the grass grows undisturbed. You kneel, slowly, carefully, and place the axe head there, wrapped again, not buried, just left. You don't mark it. You don't say a prayer. You don't look back. You were never the face of justice, never the voice, never the pen. You were the hand behind the curtain, the silent pressure that made the machine run. Necessary, feared, forgotten. You didn't wear a robe. You didn't sit in judgment. You didn't ask why. You just made the sentences real. And now that you're gone, the platform still stands. The rope still sways. The crowd still gathers. That brings us to the end of tonight's story. A life spent in the shadows of justice, where each breath served the sentence, and each silence outlived the scream. If you'd like early access to more of these slow, forgotten histories, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with other forgotten corners of history you'd like to see covered. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers Andrew S., Amanda Lampke, and Rich Davis. Sleep well.